Good afternoon. I'm Michelle Brandt, Chair of the HFMA Women in Leadership Committee, and on behalf of the committee, we're pleased to be offering our 11th program. Our last session was March the 6th, which turned out to be the last in-person HFMA program. Much has changed since then. I want to commend the HFMA Maryland chapter leadership for continuing to offer high-quality educational programs virtually. Hello, Zoom. We certainly do miss gathering in person. In-person networking was such a wonderful component of the Women in Leadership sessions. Lunch, ice cream sundae bars, happy hours. We'll just have to continue to find ways to stay connected while staying safe and healthy, apart for now. It is always my hope that these sessions help you develop your professional network. HFMA has given me an incredible network of industry contacts I would not have known if it wasn't for a part of this professional organization. Volunteerism truly helps the connectivity and relationship building. Speaking of volunteerism and relationships, I'd like to thank the amazing Women in Leadership Planning Committee, Jeanette Cross, current chapter president, Katie Eckert, current chapter MHA liaison, previous director, Amy Hardesty, current associate director, Mary Kim, previous director, and Cheryl Nottingham, current vice president of programming, in charge of the educational programming for the HFMA chapter year. It's a wonderful group to work with. I appreciate their creativity and their commitment, and of course, their friendship. For today, we have a great session planned. To begin with, we have a pre-recorded interview with Dr. Joy Drass, Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer for MedStar Health. Joy is interviewed by Krista Wall. Krista is the Assistant Vice President of Critical Care Medicine for MedStar Medical Group. We asked Krista to interview Joy because one of the themes for today's program is mentorship. Krista has benefited from Joy's mentorship, as have the other women that we've asked to participate in the live panel. The other theme that we have for today's session is leadership in crisis, a global pandemic. And of course, we'll hear about Joy's leadership journey as she shares her experiences as a physician who transitioned into hospital administration into the executive team of a large healthcare system. That interview will take about 30 minutes. Following the interview with Joy, we'll transition to the live component of this program and continue the conversation with Jill Donaldson, President of MedStar Harbor Hospital and Senior Vice President of MedStar Health. Jill will be participating in and moderating a discussion with Emily Brighton, Vice President, Professional Services of MedStar Washington Hospital Center, and Krista Wall. During this portion of the program, attendees can post questions by using the question and answer icon within the Zoom application. Also, please note that during the program, all attendees are in view-only and listen-only mode. CPE forms will be sent following the session. Evaluations, I always have to mention evaluations, will be sent following the session as well. Please know the committee reviews every one of your comments, and we're always looking for feedback and ideas. With that, I hope you enjoy the program.
Well, Joy, thank you for doing this interview. Really excited to talk to you about, your experiences in leadership and your experiences during COVID leadership in particular. I think that we'll have a really good discussion. Just a quick intro. My name's Krista Wall. I've been with MedStar for the past 3 years. Most of that time have been working directly with you, Joy. So I'm excited to kind of share my experiences with that as well. And looking forward to hearing your experiences as well. So I think maybe just to get started would be really great to have you do an intro about yourself and your background and just kind of give folks a sense of where you came from and where you're at now.
Great, thanks so much. And thank you all for having Krista and I today. It'll be a fun conversation, I'm sure. So I started my career at Georgetown in medical school, and Coming out of medical school, I went to the MedStar Washington Hospital Center as an intern and then a resident, then chief resident, and then a critical care fellow, and eventually practiced there as a critical care physician in the surgical intensive care units for about 15 years. And then in my mid-40s, I had a conversation with myself, and I said, Joy, you can't do this when you're 60, so you should be thinking about what it is you want to do for the latter part of your career. And so I made the decision to go back to school and do an MBA at that point. And I would say that that decision had mixed reviews within my family. My husband thought I was having a midlife crisis, and my son, who was about 11 at the time, couldn't understand why anybody would go to school if they didn't have to. But anyway, I did an MBA, and when I completed that, Ken Samet was just coming in as the new president at the Washington Hospital Center, and he offered me a position on his executive staff there. So while I had originally done the MBA thinking that at some point in 10 years or so I would transition out of clinical work and more into a leadership role, it was an opportunity that I couldn't turn down. And so I made the transition much more quicker than I thought I was going to from my career plans. So I was at the hospital center, and then when Georgetown Hospital came into the system, Ken's appointed me the president at Georgetown Hospital, and I was there until 2009, and then joined corporate after that. Initially having the acute care operations in the Washington region under me, and now having all of acute care operations plus a couple of other corporate departments. So I am the poster child that you can have a full career with one organization, particularly a terrific organization like MedStar Health. I've been with them my entire career, obviously not in the same job. I've had growth opportunities throughout. But when you find a really good organization from a mentoring and from a growth opportunity, they can provide that for you. So I do believe there are organizations like that, and I think MedStar is the proof of that.
I absolutely agree. I think MedStar has a really great track record of finding talent and fostering that throughout their, throughout their career and providing those opportunities for growth at the right time. So agree. I mean, lots of examples, and you are certainly one of them. So I guess, what would you say as your, as you pivoted throughout your career, were the influential factors that really got you to where you are? Those, you talked about mentorship, so that's obviously a big one. Did you have mentors in your background that kind of helped encourage you along the way? Or, what other things were really impactful as you developed from, where you started to where you are now?
I think that clearly I had terrific opportunities within MedStar, and those were created through mentorship and relationships that I had within the organization, and not just with Ken, but with other leaders within the organization. I would say the other thing is that I always was looking to stretch my opportunities and to stretch my growth as an individual and as a contributor to the organization. And so I think that while I was not good at planning my career opportunities, I think I always knew that there were different parts of the organization that I wanted to explore, and different opportunities that I wanted to have within the organization. And I was very lucky and very grateful to have those opportunities.
So I think that's an interesting point too, around, this idea of, are you planning what is the next step, or are you kind of open to what opportunities become available? What are your sort of philosophies on that, and how did you think about each move that you made from one step to the next and making those decisions?
So I would say that I was not a planner. I would say that many of the opportunities that presented themselves to me were not ones that I was thinking about or planning that was the direction that I was going to go. But because I was with a vibrant, growing organization, I didn't have to be a planner from the perspective of having those opportunities. I think, though, that each of them, as I took them on, I had to be willing to take the risk of moving into that next step. And I think that's really important. you and I, Chris, have had a lot of conversations about leadership and what's important. And I think I view the ability to take risk, the ability to make decisions when you don't have perfect information as sort of key critical characteristics of good leaders. And so I think for many of the opportunities that I was given the advantage of, they're not ones that I would have said, oh, that's my next step, I can do really good there. I think they were ones that were offered to me, and I sort of took a gulp, but took the risk of moving into that next role.
And when you were going through the process of deciding whether to take those opportunities, given that they weren't maybe necessarily on some formal plan that you had, how did you go about thinking, assessing those opportunities and deciding if they were the right next step for you?
I think it was about, did they offer me growth? Did they offer me new experiences as a leader in terms of an area that I didn't already feel confident in? And particularly when I moved on to the sort of leadership administrative track, virtually all of them offered me that, because I came out of a clinical background, right? So I was halfway through my career from a clinical background, and then sort of made the transition into leadership. So each of those steps along the way, once I really moved into the administrative track, were a big step for me. But I thought they were learning opportunities. I often say that MedStar is a learning organization, that we demonstrate that in so many different ways. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's been such a great fit for me, is that I'm all about education. I'm all about learning opportunities. And so each one of them had its own risk, because it included aspects of a role that I hadn't done before, or it required maybe knowledge that I didn't have before. But I loved the idea of it from the perspective of it would grow me and I would learn from each of those experiences. Absolutely.
Okay, so pivoting just a little bit, you've been in a lot of different arenas. You mentioned, clinical, your time spent clinically, pivoting into administrative leadership. And obviously through that time, you've also, I'm sure, experienced a lot of changes in sort of just the general environment for women in leadership during that time. So would be interested to kind of hear your perspective on, what that has looked like throughout your career, what positive changes you've seen over that time frame, and then, maybe where there are still some opportunities from your perspective for that to change in the future.
So I'm going to share with this group a little vignette of when I applied to medical school, because I think it will give you some context for how much that environment has changed over this period of time, right? So when I went to medical school, most medical schools had a quota for women, and it was 10% or less. And in one of my medical school interviews, the person who was interviewing me, who happened to be a woman, told me that she would never vote for me to be admitted to medical school because I was a Catholic woman and I probably wouldn't take the birth control pill, and I would take up a position that someone else could have. So that gives you a clue of how the world has changed over the time that I have been in, over the time that I've been in my career. Right. So the change has been pretty monumental if you understand that that's the starting point, right? Absolutely. Is it perfect yet? No. But I do think that we've come a pretty significant way with that. And I think that I think opportunities for women today are very close to being equal to what they are for men, I would say, as a general rule. I think the burden for women is that we still carry more of the outside work part of our lives, which is our family, our kids, whatever. So the challenge, I think, is less being a candidate for a role and less about being considered for a role. But the challenge for us individually is, how do you step into those roles and then also manage the other parts of your life, which are also really important. And I think over the period of time that I've been doing this, I've come to the conclusion that you can never expect that all the phases of your life are going to be going well at the same time. If that happens, it's a true gift, and you should enjoy it for every day that the world is like that. Yeah. But I think, I think Eyes Wide Open we have to admit that it's more of a challenge in leadership because of the other responsibilities that we have that are outside our workflow, and recognize that. And I think we're getting better as a country. I think we're getting better as organizations in recognizing that and making adaptations and trying to find ways to actually make that an easier transition for women. But I think I think we've come a long way. And I think if I look at the set, right, which is here at MedStar, Chief Operating Officer of the company is a woman. Chief Financial Officer of the country is a woman. So, that's a pretty significant statement, I think, in terms of where we've come compared if you look at it 15 years ago or so.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was one, when I was applying for opportunities and looking at organizations, it was very apparent that our C-suite has diversity in a way that a lot of other organizations just doesn't have. And, speaking personally through my experiences with MedStar, I've benefited from the mentorship of all of those women and the men who, I agree. I have never felt like I have had less opportunity to be considered for a role based on gender. But I do think it's important what you mentioned, which is that the challenges are maybe different in the sense that, it's not so much are you qualified or able to be considered for a role, but, how do you balance that with the other expectations and things at home with family and, the other life stuff. Maybe just a quick minute or so, what has your approach been like with that over the years? And do you have any advice for folks that are trying to balance those things and build a career?
I wish I had a magic bullet, and I don't. I think that, but I would go back to one thing that you said, and that is that I think women do have opportunities. But I think the burden many times, though, is on us as a leader, on us as a female leader, to figure out how to do that balancing act. Right. That's where the disparity comes. I don't think there is as much of a gap in opportunity today. I think the disparity is the burden that women leaders carry because of their responsibilities outside whatever the role is, and how you accommodate to those, right? Which I think is really what's important. Again, I think my only piece of advice is I think early on I sort of had this sense that you could keep all the balls up in the air at the same time. And I've learned over the course of my life that it's really pretty hard to do that. And so you have to be, you have to recognize that. You have to forgive yourself for that if one of those balls happens to drop. As I said, when everything is going well, you enjoy those days because they're not every day.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to pivot a little bit here again as well. And I think obviously a lot of folks listening to this have been going through the same types of things we have in this organization related to the response to COVID. And I think that in particular has required more of leaders and maybe a different leadership style than you would in a normal time. This is really crisis leadership. So would be really interested to hear, from a personal perspective, what you've learned about yourself and your own leadership style through COVID, and just what your approach has been and what you think makes a good leader in a time of crisis like this.
So I think, my own philosophy about leadership is that that leadership is all about trust, right? And that you build trust through transparency and communication. And trust is the currency of leadership. When people trust you, then that's how you are able to lead. And I don't think that philosophy was any different during COVID. I think if anything, it was stepping it up, right? Because communication was critically important and transparency was critically important. And I think the challenge for us during that was finding enough channels of communication that we could get to all parts of the organization, because the organization, as any organization, any healthcare organization during this crisis, was really very maximally functioning and stressed, right, from an operational perspective. And so it was really important that while I think MedStar has great communication, starts with our CEO, who really, really sets that tone. I think we were challenged as leaders during the COVID crisis to find additional ways to make sure that we were getting information, we were getting communication, we were getting transparency out to every single associate across MedStar. And so I think it challenged us to find different ways. It wasn't the usual cascade, and we had to do it quickly because things were changing quickly. So the normal kinds of communication that you think about where you're trying to get to the whole organization, you have time to think about what's the message, how's the best way to get it to them, what's the best channel to get it out. These were messages that we had to get to people within 12 to 24 hours because of changing dynamics. So I think that was really a big challenge and opportunity for us. And I think that the feedback from our associates has been not perfect, but you guys did pretty well. And I think that they give us credit for that communication. I think it helped to make them feel engaged with us for sure. I think it helped to convey at least a little bit of a sense of safety that we were looking at for them and, what we were doing for them. And so I don't think we did anything radically different. It wasn't like there was a right-hand turn. Mm-hmm. I think we just had to accelerate and turn up the jets on all the parts and pieces of leadership that have served us up to this point in time.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think maybe another angle of leadership on, with COVID in particular as well, is that, there's leadership within our own organization and with our associates, and that was critically important as well. But given that this was really a public health crisis and something that affected the community, we had a lot of community leaders and, just worried patients and worried community members that were really looking to the health systems for leadership in this time as well. So what do you think our role has been in leading from that perspective, and how do you feel about that?
I think that's a great point. It's a really great point, Krista. So if you look at the actual patients that MedStar saw during this period of time, so how many people did we touch in one way or another who were COVID positive? It's edging up almost to 23,000 now, which is a phenomenal number when you think about it. When you think about the number of COVID tests that we provided within MedStar, we're close to 175,000 now. Again, a sort of really big number, but very important as it relates to our relationship and our engagement with our communities, and very important for us, right? We're a not-for-profit organization. We are here to serve our communities, and clearly that was a mission that was in front of us through this entire episode. And I think that we showed that we were there through multiple different ways. I think there's more that we need to do, as with every healthcare organization, given where it is. But I'm really, really proud of all of the associates within MedStar that stepped up during this period of time to support the effort to take care of those 23,000 people. That's in a very short period of time, right? That's between March and now. And we had other patients in addition to those, right? Yeah. That's a significant community commitment, and I am really quite proud of all of the associates within MedStar, and I'm privileged to having served with them, because I think it was really a good moment for us, and I think a good demonstration to the community of our commitment.
It was. I feel like it was a big team moment where sort of everybody came together with a common mission, which was really cool to be a part of and to watch. You have people working across areas that they normally didn't have anything to do with, and just really doing anything that they could to help. I think we also saw a lot of innovation. So from a leadership perspective, having to be agile and changing really quickly, and maybe our telehealth experience is one way that we saw that, where both from an internal and an external perspective, we had to develop capabilities and then sort of retool expectations in the community about how care should be delivered during a really unprecedented time. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, sort of just really the need to move quickly and change and adapt really quickly as well.
I think that's exactly right. And I would, as you were talking, I was thinking that, we certainly scaled quickly. Telehealth is obviously the one, but even the ability to get testing done, the ability to step up in our prompt cares. I mean, all of those pieces were really important. We scaled up occupational health to make sure that we were there for our associates, and that if they had a worry or a call or they needed to get in touch with us, that they could do that. So there was a lot of innovation, and as you said, really a lot of redeploying of associates across the system, which really made that innovation and made that agility possible, because we could redeploy assets. I think the challenge for us as MedStar leaders now is that we take that momentum that we had about how we got much more quick at making decisions, how we were much more agile at solving problems, how we were much more innovative and open to accepting other solutions. We have to now take that accelerated momentum and carry it forward into what we do going forward. That really is the challenge, I think, for MedStar leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. I think, you learn a lot in a very quick amount of time, and carrying that forward and making that part of the culture and DNA of the organization will maybe be the next leadership moment, and, how we think about the next steps from here.
Absolutely.
So I guess, pivoting just a little bit sort of back to the idea of mentorship, we talked about mentors that you've had that have impacted your career and, that have helped you sort of get to where you are today. Now in the, position that you're at in your career, obviously I view you as a mentor for me, and you've been extremely influential in my career so far. How do you think about being a mentor, and what is your approach to doing that, and how does that now fit into the pieces of your career today?
So I'd answer it in a couple of different ways. I mean, I think if you think about where I am in my career, which is towards the end of the runway rather than the beginning of the runway, right? I think helping to mentor and helping to develop leaders for MedStar is a really key priority for me as I think about it. I'm really grateful for this invitation and this opportunity, because it's actually forced me to sort of think about mentorship in a very focused way. And I think of mentorship in sort of two different ways. I think of it in terms of some organizations that have very formalized mentorship programs where there's a formal connection and a formal part of the program and whatever. And then I think of mentorship that happens real time in the course of how you progress through an organization. Mm-hmm. I think I would be a terrible mentor in the former. I think I'm better in the latter, right? So I think about the mentorship that I provide as being, it's going to sound funny, but I think of it as like real time, right? It is actually challenging talented young leaders to grow, and then supporting them when you've given them a stretch opportunity, right? And giving feedback as you're moving through that stretch opportunity. To me, that's the ultimate opportunity for really good mentoring of young leaders. And it can happen with people who are directly reporting to me. It can also happen in other ways, right? So one example would be last week we had a little bit of a snafu over a particular issue here at MedStar, and one of the relatively senior people in the organization, not at the set level, but a leader, sent me an email to say, I apologize that this got off the rails, blah, 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 blah. And my response to that leader was, you might have thought about X, Y, and Z as a way to handle that situation. And they responded and said, not only would it have been good to handle that situation, but I'm going to remember that because it's good advice for other things. So that's sort of, again, informal mentoring, right? It's not a formal relationship. It wasn't even somebody who reported to me. but I think mentoring occurs on a daily basis. And I think sometimes we fall in the trap of thinking of it more in the bucket of a formalized mentoring program, rather than thinking of it in terms of I can learn from interactions that are occurring every day from people that I respect. I can see how they function and I can see what advice they give me. And that, to me, I think is real-time mentoring. And I think probably, at least for me and the way that I develop my leadership, lasts longer.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think you said something earlier in the conversation about how leadership is really about trust. And I think that for me applies to the mentor relationship as well. I think what has been most impactful for me in your leadership style and mentorship style with me directly is that, the types of projects and opportunities from an early career perspective that you have trusted me with has really given me the opportunity to grow and develop skills. And, what you said earlier, you're not leaving me out on an island here to figure it out myself. The door is open, and you have always had great perspective and advice and support for me as I've been working through those issues. But just the fact that you were willing to trust me with projects that I knew were really meaningful and impactful to the organization, and had a chance to really make an impact on any small slice of the organization, I think is what has really allowed me to progress in my career so far, because I'm really challenged to stretch and gain new skills and meet new people, build a network, and all of the things that will be important for progressing. And I think to your point, watching other young careerists in formal mentorship programs where they, have lunch conversations or coffee conversations, it's not that those are not valuable, but they maybe don't increase your toolbox in the same way that those real-time opportunities do. And I think they do stick with you longer. I think to your point about the leader within MedStar, when you apply that advice to a real situation that you're going through, it's a lot more easy to apply that moving forward. It sticks with you in a way that's different than a conversation over coffee, I think. So
I think that's right. And I want to insert one other thing here before we get too far down the field is, we've been talking a lot about the benefits of what a mentor can bring to a young leader. Mm-hmm. We haven't talked about the benefits that the young leader brings to the person who's doing the mentoring, right? This is a two-way relationship. Mm-hmm. And I have learned from every single person that would be designated within the organization as having mentoring from me. I mean, I have learned from them. I've learned specific things. I've learned a different lens of looking at problems. I've learned a different lens of looking at how to solve a particular problem. And so I think while we frequently talk about the advantages to someone who is being mentored by a senior leader, I want leaders to remember that your mentor is getting learning from you as well. It's a two-way relationship. And I have learned from every single one of the young leaders that have been in my area and moved on to something else. They've left me with something for sure. And so I think it's really important that we don't talk about this as just a one-way relationship or a one-way positive relationship. I think it works both ways. And I think to take us back around to the comment about it being a learning organization, mentors can learn from young leaders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a great point, and it's a good point as well, because it obviously takes time, out of your very busy schedule to be a mentor, and so understanding what those impacts can be on your own, your own leadership style and your own, life, how that's a positive relationship for you as well, I think is important, and a reason to be a mentor from a selfish perspective as well, right? Okay, well, Joy, I've covered the main areas that we wanted to talk about, but are there any other, closing pieces of advice or comments that you might have for this group on any of the topics we've talked about or others?
No, I don't think so. I think that we've covered it. I guess I would, the topic of this and some of the questions were really focused around women leaders and having other women role models to mentor them.
Sure.
And I think the only thing that I would add is I would hope that everybody, and I'm sure you do, but I hope that everybody would have an open mind that you can be mentored by men and women. There's a diversity there, right? And it's good to understand and get context and get the sense from both, because there have been things written about how women or men's leadership style may differ a bit here or there. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I wouldn't opine on that, but I think what I would say is open your mind that you can have a mentor within an organization other than another woman senior leader. And so I think it's really important that in today's world, it's about diversity, right? And we have to be diverse as well. We have to be open to looking at different leadership styles and learning from those who are willing to teach us.
Absolutely. I think all great points, and the mentor relationship can be valuable from anyone, and definitely different perspectives only help to increase your own perspective and give you a different lens for sure. All right. Well, thanks, Joy. I really appreciate the time to catch up.
Thanks to everybody, and I wish you a good meeting.
Yes. Thank you.
I hope everyone enjoyed that interview. Now it's time to transition to the live portion of our program. Jill Donaldson, Emily Brighton, and Krista Wall are going to kick us off with their introductions. Please note that during this part of the session, you are able to post questions in the Q&A icon, and that the program will run till about 1:15 p.m. And we hope you can join us for the entire program. Thank you again. Jill, hand it over to you.
Great, thank you, Michelle. So wanted to start with introductions for all three of us. So my name is Jill Donaldson, and I'm the president of MedStar Harbor Hospital. I started back in the day, grew up in Massachusetts. I was the quintessential tomboy and played sports my whole life, and which had a huge impact on me and my leadership skills, my style, and how I approach probably life as well as my job. And growing up in Massachusetts, went to school at Tufts University, and then went on to the University of Michigan to get my master's in health administration. When I left Michigan, I decided to do a one-year internship and ended up in Washington, D.C. at the Washington Hospital Center as an administrative intern under Ken Samet. And from there, I have had a variety of jobs within MedStar. So when Dr. Drass called herself the poster child for opportunity within MedStar, I'm right behind her. I've spent my whole career within MedStar. Started in strategic planning and then went on to operational roles, mostly service line roles. So spent time in cardiology, neurology, oncology, all the ologies apparently. And then took a turn to the left, I guess, and my most recent role was with the MedStar Medical Group. So took a step back from kind of hospital and service line operations and spent the last 5 years really focused on the physician enterprise as MedStar has developed their medical group internally, and then was offered the position to come here to Harbor 6 months ago. So I have wonderful timing. And I've been here in this position since April 1st. For me, personal factoids, I'm married. My husband and I have a 2-year-old yellow lab son that we adopted from Lab Rescue a couple of years ago. And my passion for sports has shifted from playing them to watching them. And I am a season ticket holder for the Washington Nationals, Washington Capitals, and pretty much any other sports team that I can go see. Obviously not right now, but in normal times. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Emily and ask her to introduce herself. Emily?
Great, thanks, Jill. I'm thrilled to be here, thrilled to be on this with both you, Jill, and you, Krista, both of whom I have close and great relationships with, and so very exciting to spend some time with you today. So my name is Emily Brighton. I'm the Vice President of Professional Services at MedStar Washington Hospital Center. following I'll give a little similar brief background on myself. I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, actually. I moved to Washington, D.C. right before high school. So went to DC public school. Not many of us followed that trajectory of being from DC and sort of ending up back here, it seems. But I went to high school in DC, went off to University of Texas, where I got my bachelor's degree in kinesiology with a minor in business. I then moved back to DC, where I worked for a few years for the Pediatric AIDS Foundation in DC, ran all their youth giving programs, so was on the fundraising side. I then went to George Washington University for my master's in healthcare administration. GW's program has a required third-year administrative fellowship. I did mine in the corporate office at MedStar Health. And did that from 2011 to 2012, finished up my fellowship and worked actually under Dr. Joy Drass, who you just heard from, for the next 6 years in a variety of different operational roles. I started out as the Director of Operational Support for the Washington Region service lines. So I worked on creating the infrastructure for our service line integrations across the region, and then following that across the system. So I built budgets, strategic plans, managed all of her strategic capital and operating budgets, and then took on more responsibility over time. Was then the Assistant Vice President of Service Line Operations for a few years. And then my prior role before I came here was I was the Vice President of Service Line Operations, worked closely with Jill, with MedStar Medical Group. So I worked with that team and sort of liaised between service line leadership and the medical group, worked on a lot of transitions, moving service lines into the medical group. After that, I was ready to be more on the front lines of acute healthcare. And when Dr. Greg Argyros became the president of MedStar Washington Hospital Center just over 2 years ago, he called me and said, do you want to come be on my executive team? And the timing was right. I was ready to experience something in a little bit of a different way. So I've now been at the hospital center for the past 2 years, and having a great experience here as well. A little bit about me personally. I too played sports growing up. I played volleyball all through high school, pretty competitively, and think that, and definitely agree with Jill that has impacted kind of my leadership style and how I work with others on my team. I also am married and have 2 young girls. I have a 4-year-old named Noah and a 7-year-old named Maya. And navigating what schooling looks like for them these days. I have an incredible and very, very supportive husband who also has a significant role of his own in the nonprofit world as the chief development officer of one of the local nonprofits. I have recently, over the past several years, become an avid runner. That's how I kind of decompress and spend my time when I'm not with my family or at work.
Great, thank you, Emily. And now I will turn it to Krista, although I feel like we already know you from the video, but you could introduce.
You've heard too much from me already, but I'll just give a little bit more background on myself. So I'm Krista Wall, also really excited to be here and talk to everybody and do this with Emily and Jill. As Emily mentioned, have been blessed to be able to work with the 2 of them over the years, and so I think will be a really good conversation. I'm from Salt Lake City originally, so grew up there, did my undergrad degree in finance at the University of Utah, stayed there. Always knew that I wanted to be in healthcare during my undergrad degree, actually worked in pharmacy for several years as I was kind of trying to work through what exactly I wanted to do long term. Ended up going to the University of Minnesota to also get my master's in healthcare administration. And then same as both Jill and Emily, ended up coming to MedStar to do my 1-year administrative fellowship. I also did that at our MedStar system office here, and that is sort of my first introduction to Joy, as she participates as one of the preceptors for that program. Following my fellowship, I took a role very similar to Emily in service line operations, helping to support from a strategic planning perspective and just operations for strategic initiatives for our service lines across the MedStar system. Have been doing that for the last couple of years until really just last month, when I have now pivoted into a role with critical care medicine in the MedStar medical group, and still figuring out exactly what that looks like, but the goal is to help to lead some integration of that service line into a single system-wide service line for MedStar. So really looking forward to that challenge and opportunity as a next step. I am also married. My husband is great, and also have 2 kids. We have a son, Owen, who is 6, daughter Quinn, who is 3. So they keep us very busy. A lot of our free time is filled up with kids sports. In sharp contrast to both Jill and Emily, I have basically 0 hand-eye coordination. Probably the only person from Salt Lake City that cannot ski. So sports were never my thing growing up, but we do love watching sports. We're huge NBA fans, so Utah Jazz is our team, and fill up a lot of our time watching them from the sidelines as well.
Great, thank you, Krista. So the 3 of us who apparently are from all over the country, I'm learning as we're talking this morning or this afternoon, I guess, we have a set of prepared questions that are similar to the ones that Krista asked Joy in the video that we'll start to walk through, but then I'm also keeping my eye on the Q&A, and so that as people write in questions, we'll address those as well. So I'm going to kick us off with a very broad question, and we'll start with Emily. Share with us a few influential factors that led you to be where you are in your career today.
Yeah, happy to. I would say that that the first was probably my coming to MedStar Health and the administrative fellowship. What people may not know about the program we have, although hopefully seeing the 3 of us here and the path that we've all taken similarly through that program, it's a program that really values growing leaders, and so I think that that really sort of started the path for me within this organization. I would say the other was definitely going and working for Joy. I had a few different opportunities coming out of my fellowship. And Ken Samet said to me, okay, those all sound good, but go talk to Joy. And I went and I met with her, and she said, there are a couple different things I have in mind for you. One is, very straightforward, pretty clean, pretty, specific job description. She said, the other one, I have no idea what I need. I know that I just need some help. I need to create some infrastructure. You'd basically write your own job description, and you kind of come up with a role. And I said, okay, great, that's what I want to do. And it was a big leap of faith, but I think it was definitely the most influential factor in my career was taking that step and working for her, then for the next 6 years. And then definitely coming to the hospital center. People often say, if you can make it at the hospital center, you can make it anywhere. In a recent conversation I had with Ken Samet, he said to me, 2 years at the hospital center is 5 years elsewhere. And so, it was definitely, that's something that has definitely changed my leadership style and influenced my career a lot.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to jump in here, and then I'm going to ask Christopher a third comparison on this one. So one of my influential factors was also Dr. Drass, right? Which is of course why she was the video star of our meeting today. So interestingly, I came out of my fellowship and started in a strategic planning role, and I loved it. I'm a data wonk. I love the role itself. But I got to the place where I was like, I don't think I'm going to do this for my whole career. And so what do I do next? And at the time, Joy was moving into the role of the president of Georgetown. And so I went to meet with her to say, well, maybe there's some opportunity there. And her response to me was, go to Georgetown in whatever job you can find, and we'll figure it out when I get there. So it was a very, it was, yes, I want you to go there. I need your skill set and talent in that organization, but I'm not really even sure what I'll have you doing, but we'll figure it out. And so it was, and at this point, you know, she was just a significant role model in terms of a female leader in the organization. And I trusted her that she would put me in a role that would continue to advance my career. And so even though it was this weird, like you, Emily, nebulous, like something shiny job over here, I was willing to take the risk, which is one of the things that you have to be willing to do to advance in your career, is take some level of risk. And for me, just randomly going over to Georgetown and to say I'll figure it out later was obviously a risk that had great reward. And Krista, I don't know if you also have a similar story, but you might.
It seems like a theme with Joy for sure. You know, she's like, I know that you've got some talent. Let's figure out how to use it. So, you know, very similar. I think I partnered also in building my own job description in some ways when I joined her. And the job, you know, I don't think Joy thinks in terms of job descriptions. I think she, you know, sees what challenges are out there in the organization, and she, you know, says, here's this problem, go out and solve it. And I think, you know, we talked about it a lot in the video that you guys just watched, but I think that has had such a huge impact on my growth in a short period of time, because, you know, she's saying, here's this problem, it's real, it's impactful, it means something to the organization. Yeah, I need you to figure out how to solve it. And, you know, I'm here to support you. If you have questions, her door is open. But a lot, you know, there's a lot of trust that goes into that in terms of saying, you know, you figure out how to address this problem, and you learn a lot and grow a lot in a short period of time. And it feels risky and ambiguous and nebulous a lot of times, but I couldn't agree more that it by far is a huge factor in getting me to where I am now.
Great, thank you. You know, I think Joyce had an interesting vignette about being a woman in leadership, and for all three of us, we're mentored by a female. Obviously, in the MedStar organization, we've had the benefit of having very strong female and physician, actually, mentors and role models. And I just wanted to pose the question around the positive changes you've seen for women in leadership over the course of your career. And Emily, I'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, listening to Joy, I think she's absolutely right. I mean, certainly it's not uniform across every industry. It's not even uniform across all of healthcare, right? That women have equal opportunities for advancement and leadership as our male counterparts. In many industries, that is not the case. So I do not at all want to diminish the challenges that, you know, that many of my fellow, you know, female leaders feel. But I will say that certainly, you know, certainly within our organization, even in my almost 10 years within MedStar, I've seen more and more opportunities for, you know, for women. I think that I would say we actually still have a ways to go. While I think that there are opportunities, you know, Joy is right that it is harder as you think about the responsibilities outside of work. You know, majority of you know, many healthcare administration programs are females. And then when you look at the progression, still many of the leadership roles are held by men in healthcare. And so you see that what happens is that drop off over time, many times because the responsibilities outside of work are too significant for some. And so while I do think that we've come a long way, we see it in our own organization, I don't want to say that we are all the way there. I think that women still have challenges.
Great.
Yeah,
Krista, bounce over to you.
Yeah, I think there's like a macro version of this and a micro, right? So totally agree that in the sense of when you look at organizations, even within healthcare and outside of it, you see some organizations that do this really well and some where there is still some opportunity, I think. And, I think a lot of that is about being really intentional from an organizational perspective at valuing and championing diversity in a lot of ways, and that has to be really an intentional decision to do that. I think MedStar, we're absolutely an organization that does this really well. And I mentioned it in the conversation with Joy, but I have never felt like I have had fewer opportunities within this organization to be considered for a role, which I think is something that I don't take for granted. On a micro level, I think personally growing up in Salt Lake City, it's a unique culture and very conservative and traditional. And so, growing up, it wasn't the same for me. When I looked around at my friends' moms and women in my community, many of them chose to forego the opportunities to have a career and stay home and raise families. And I didn't have a lot of examples growing up of women that, actively chose to pursue careers when, especially, those that had families and wanted to have families. So I think from a micro perspective, this is one area where the specific mentors and leaders in my life that I've had that have, opened my eyes at different times throughout my career to opportunities and pushed me to think about what I really wanted, had such a huge impact in, me even sort of seeking out those opportunities as well. So I think even when we're not seeing that maybe equal opportunity from an organizational perspective, we still have opportunities to support women who have those ambitions and are looking for opportunities in a micro way as well.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to take a question from our Q&A from one of our attendees. So thank you for writing this in. What advice do you have to women on asserting ourselves in the workplace? Do you feel that there is sometimes a double standard for women? Krista, I'm going to bounce to you first.
Sure. I think this is maybe an area where I don't feel that I personally struggle as much. Maybe I talk more than I really should, right? I think from a personality perspective, it's something where I've always had things to say. And, my mom can tell you that I was always talking over people as a young kid. So sometimes I'm trying to, take a step back. But I absolutely do see that in a lot of women that I've worked with and some that, have even been, have reported to me or been in, that I have helped mentor, have really struggled with knowing like when to jump into conversations and things like that. And I think that, recognizing that you have value and that what you have to say is important, I think it goes a long way. And sometimes you have to just do it. Honestly, it's scary and not always fun to speak up, but I think the first time you do it is hard. The second time you do it is a little bit easier, and just have to do it.
Okay, thank you. And Emily?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with everything that Krista said. I mean, I think that one of the, there are a couple things that I would add. One is sort of piggybacking off of what Krista said, but be confident and know your own abilities. You're in the room for a reason. And so, be confident in yourself and what you have to bring to the table, and, in what you want to say. I would also say, sort of pick your battles and know your audience, right? So not every hill is the hill to die on. And I think that's a comment both for, really for anyone. We see it, I see it oftentimes in young leaders also, but it's knowing when to speak up and be assertive and when it's just not worth it, right? And then the final thing I would say is sort of surrounding yourself with people who support you, and who know you. It's building that rapport with people where that you've built that relationship with them, where if you're really speaking up and being assertive about something, they know that this is not just the, they do this with every single issue. It's really, they know that you know when to kind of make more of an issue out of it. So for me, those are really kind of the three key items.
Right. Great, thank you. So I'm going to switch gears a little, well, a lot, because, you know, a Zoom meeting cannot go by where we don't talk about COVID. So, so we're going to, and obviously this has been, so I'll speak from my own perspective. Taking a new job as the leader of a hospital at the start of a pandemic is not really what I had planned for myself in my career, but it ended up obviously offering a phenomenal opportunity. And you know, this question of what sort of leadership attributes have served you well during COVID, and what have you learned about your leadership style during this time? And for myself, you know, Joy during the video talked a lot about the importance of communication, and it's been an interesting time. And I think everybody on this call, given that we're all sitting on Zoom right now instead of in the room together, would say, I'm sure everybody's learned about themselves, whether they like being on video or not. But also I think that Joy's comments about the importance of communication and what kind of communicator are you? And are you somebody who does well in a one-on-one, person-to-person interaction? Are you someone who does well in front of a room? Are you someone who just does well speaking to a camera? And unfortunately, the rules changed, right? So I personally hate being on video, which is funny that I'm sitting here today, but I think that I am an in-person communicator, and so that channel works well for me. But in the time of a pandemic, it doesn't, because you cannot tell 1,000 people that we're doing something differently in one-on-one conversations. And so the communication piece, I will say for myself personally, I learned a lot about what sort of communication style works for me and what works well in a pandemic, and do those two things match? And that was an opportunity for me to challenge myself to grow and try some different things around how do we get messages out, and how do we make sure people, two-way, right, that people are heard. Because the issue in this pandemic has been, while as challenged as people are in this hospital here today, their personal lives are also completely turned upside down. And so making sure that people have outlets and get heard, so that two-way communication piece has just been very critical for myself personally, but then also, of course, in this role. So Emily, I'll ask you the same.
Yeah, it's been it's been a crazy many months at this point. And I sit at MedStar Washington Hospital Center, where we took care of the most COVID patients in this region. We had a lot of really, really sick patients, and we sent a lot of those patients home to their families. And we also had, very, very sadly, a lot of patients who died in our hospital alone. And so it has been a difficult time. It's been a difficult time for leaders. It's been a difficult time for frontline associates. And I think we've had to, when we were in the height of it, you have to kind of go, and you can't really think about it. And then when you step back, it's quite dramatic to think about kind of how much everyone has been through. At the beginning of it, there were, I think for the first 6 weeks, I was in the hospital every single day for those first 6 weeks. We were all hands on deck. We were sleeping at the hospital. We were on regular 24-hour shifts of being in the hospital. And early on, my husband, who was, like many, like most people, I think like everyone, very afraid of what was happening. And he said to me, aren't you scared? And I said to him, there are 6,000 people out there. We have 6,000 associates in our hospital. I don't have the luxury of being scared, right? And so that was sort of the leadership moment, for me, and I think for our leadership team at the hospital center, is when we go out in front of our teams, we have to be confident. We have to be able to communicate effectively, but you also need to have that outlet. And we needed that with each other. And so what I learned is how much I really thrive off of team. and how much, whether that's the team that sort of reports to me, or that's my colleagues on the center executive team. But I'm someone who thrives off of team, and we really needed that. I learned a lot about what I need from both my personal and professional support systems to continue to be an effective leader. And I think that, those are the things that you really kind of learn about yourself in really, really difficult times where you have to come together.
Great, thank you. So Krista, I'm going to throw you a curveball. This is a question from the chat. How do you handle work-life balance?
Yeah, classic question, right? And we talked about this a lot too, I think, in Joy's comments, and just saying that, while we may have lots of opportunities to progress in a career, we still often have a lot of work to do at home. And I am very, very fortunate. So my husband and I had a conversation very early on in our marriage. I've always been very driven and always knew that I wanted to have a conversation or a career, and always also knew that I wanted to have a family and be a mom, and that both of those things were very important to me. And, my husband, I think, is one of those guys that was really honestly born to be a dad. And he's fantastic at it, does a really great job. And, we had to have a conversation and make a decision for our family about how we were going to balance those two things. And he actually stays home full time as a stay-at-home dad with our family. So I'm really fortunate, because I know that when I'm at work, I have somebody at home taking care of the kids that I know loves them just as much as I do. But all that being said, I still obviously really want to be a part of them growing up, and be there for, this virtual school thing and all of the things that go along with them growing up. And I agree with Joy. I think it's something that I've had to figure out over time. I don't know that there's any magic bullet for it. And I don't know, honestly, also, that I always do the best job at it. I think during COVID especially, I learned about myself that I have some work to do in figuring out how to balance really important things happening at work and really important things happening at home. And it still breaks my heart every morning when I leave to go to work, and, my kids are crying and don't want mom to leave, you know what I mean? So, but we do little things, I'm always home for bedtime. We read a story together every night, those little things, and I honestly think that they're just as important for me as they are for the kids. And I try really hard to have a clear separation between when I'm at work and when I'm at home. I'm not a big fan of, responding to emails or doing things when I leave the office. I like to sort of turn off and be as much as possible at home with my kids when I'm at home with my kids. And, like I said, I think always more to learn, and always more to do to try to get that balance right. And I think Joy's absolutely right as well, that sometimes it's easier to do than it is at other times. And, kind of have to be able to give yourself some grace on that as well.
Absolutely. So we have 5 minutes left. So I'm going to ask a question from the chat. In thinking of the new careerists, what advice would you give your own younger self if you were just starting out in your career in healthcare all over again? So I'll start, since I saw the question before you guys, to give you a minute. So the one thing I would say is, and I'm going to come back to the mentorship piece. I mean, Emily and Krista and I all had just the good fortune of kind of like running into Joy early in our career, and we get it, right? Like that's not a lucky step that everybody gets. So my comment would be, the more people you can meet, the better, right? So it is hard to do, but asking people for a networking meeting, or just for 30 minutes of their time to understand what makes them tick, learning about people, what is their job like? The vast majority of executives do not mind those meetings or at getting asked those questions. In fact, I love them, because it's an opportunity for me to think, wow, I have come a long way, right? But also you need to connect with people, A, to be known, and B, to find that right mentor, right? So somewhere along the line, these multiple conversations, you might find that person that you click with that would be willing to serve as your mentor. And the other comment I would make is there is no such thing as one mentor, right? I've had dozens in my career. Interestingly, Joy is my only female mentor. All the rest of mine have been men. So not gender specific, not industry specific. The more people you can meet, the more opportunity you have to get advice, get mentorship. And so I say it's putting yourself out there. And interestingly, I would say events like this where you get to meet people is one of the best ways to start to meet people where you can follow up and make those connections. So Krista, I'll punt to you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what you said, Jill. I think when I think back, Joy obviously has played a huge role in all of our careers, but there are so many mentors in my past life that have impacted my life in big ways and in really small ways. You know, one meeting where they opened my eyes to some opportunity that I really had not even been thinking about in the past. And I think looking for those people that are going to take a genuine, authentic interest in your career and be able to help you move forward, that's what you're looking for in a mentor. And I think the best way that you find those people is by taking a genuine, authentic interest in what other people are doing, right? So, you know, the conversations where, you know, you're meeting with people just to find somebody who's going to help you move forward in your career versus I'm really interested in so-and-so, what they're doing. That's fascinating to me. I really want to learn about that. People love taking the opportunity to reflect on their career and what they've been doing. And I think that they can see that authentic interest. And that's what helps to build that connection that turns into long-term or even short-term mentorship. So agree, it's as many people as you can talk to, the better. And each one of them will have impacts in your career in ways that you may not even realize until later.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Emily?
So I'll be really brief, but you know, I agree with all of that. The one thing I would add is maybe sometimes a little bit of an unpopular thing to say. You know, I know we talk a lot about work-life balance, and obviously that's critically important. But what I often tell early careerists is put in the time, put in the work. It's not just about sort of moving to the next step and, you know, looking for people who can help, you know, you get to the next step. It's also about taking on hard projects, taking on, you know, difficult and a lot of work and putting in the time to really understand that work, I think really goes a long way. I think people then see that you're ambitious and eager and want to, you know, to take on more. So I would say understand what your limits are and where you want to draw that sort of work-life balance for yourself in a way that's comfortable for you. But also take the time to really understand things, work hard, put in the hours. I mean, I hate to say it, but that is something that I think is still really important.
Great. So we are out of time. We do have a couple of questions that we did not get to, which will be answered via email after the session today. So we want to make sure everyone's questions do go answered, and we recognize we didn't get to everyone. So I want to thank Emily and Krista. This has been a great session, and I appreciate you all participating with me and making this a very easy conversation this afternoon.
Thanks, Jill.
And thanks, Jill.
Thank you.
Jill, Emily, and Krista, thank you all so much for your participation. And our time always goes so fast when we have a panel, especially. This happens when we're in person, and now it obviously happens when we're doing Zoom meetings as well. So thank you, Jill, for mentioning that all questions will be answered. Apologies that we couldn't keep the dialogue going. We want to be conscious of people's time. We were originally going to try to squeeze everything in 1 hour. Knew that we couldn't do that, so we extended to 1:15. But certainly from a program perspective, we want to continue to offer these opportunities to connect, even virtually right now, and hopefully one day soon, you know, back to our in-person meetings and happy hours and ice cream sundaes and lunches and all the good networking opportunities that we have offered in the past and will be offered again in the future. But to the great points that were made, we can still stay connected. You can utilize this professional organization or your channels within your own work organizations to certainly do that and grow and develop even during these very, very busy times. So again, thank you to Jill, Emily, Krista, and to Joy as well for participating in this event. I think it was wonderful. Hope to engage you all again. I'd also like to thank sort of our wizard behind the scenes, and that is our Zoom expert, Kalita Burton, who dealt with my very big Zoom anxiety about launching this program. So she's done a fantastic job, and there are others that support her, and we appreciate all of the efforts. Couple quick reminders before we close. CPE forms, again, they will be sent out electronically after the program. Evaluations will be sent out. Please take a couple minutes to fill them out and give your feedback. We do have upcoming programs on October 23rd, how to get HFMA certified for free. And then on November 13th, we have a Charge Master Codes and Challenges workshop that is being offered as well. As always, check out the HFMA website in order to register for those programs or to learn more. Thank you again for attending. Have a great day. Stay safe, healthy, well, and we look forward to gathering again sometime soon.